You ever feel like your life is driven more by the what you should be doing or what you should be versus what you really want to be doing or who you want to be? How do you reconcile these two things? How do we not ignore the things that we should be doing, like the chores of taking the garbage out and cleaning the dishes, but also reconnecting to what we really want and what we want our lives to look like, what we want to be spending our time with? Because the reality is we don't spend as much time focused on what we really want, and we spend more time focusing on the shoulds of our life. And as we like to joke here, that's when you're shooting all over yourself. So in this clip, that's what we talk about. How do you overcome that? How do you reconcile those two things? And how do you get refocused, recentered on the wants of your life?
My favorite topic, because it's me. Like, this is, something that I've struggled with for a really long time, right? Like, I am someone who's identified as a rules follower, as someone who is super responsible, doesn't let anyone down, will always have your back. And because of that, like, I have a reputation to maintain, right? My identity, my ego is so wrapped up in that I can't let this stuff fall. And the shoulds always get in the way of the desires and the wants, right? Mm-hmm. They're always going to take priority because my being responsible or my being loyal to other people is more important than me taking care of myself, right? Like that's the identity, that's like the ego play that's been created. And to use the filter that I like to use about identity and the equations that get made up is there was a time in my life where I was I failed. I had a perceived failure in my life. And something that I had said in that moment, and it was more of like a internal feeling of I'm not enough, I'm not worthy. And what my ego created, the identity it created was like, no, I'm going to take care of others. I'm going to be the hard worker. I'm going to be the one that's there always and taking care of all the things that I'm responsible for, because I'm a responsible hard worker. And I've lived that, and it's brought me a lot of success. I've gotten jobs from it. People respect me because I do what I say I'm going to do, like, we're still human. Like, there's times where we fail, but like, that's taken such a hold on me that the ego has to maintain the liveliness of that. Like, that identity is a person. It's a living, breathing entity, and it needs to keep that going. So It just keeps, like, even if you don't have anything going on in your life, your ego is going to create a problem for you to step in and use Mr. Responsible Hard Worker. Mm-hmm. And so this is where you're going to, like, even if you didn't have the problem, this is why this person will never have the room. He's always waiting for the room. Oh, as soon as this is done, then I'll have some space to think about what I actually want. The problem is that's never going to happen because the ego just keeps running this equation, because then when it steps in and does it, it's validated. It's like, oh, see, I am a responsible hard worker.
Yeah.
And so the desire is never there. And so step one is to just kind of recognize and reconcile that that's just a program that you're running. It's not actually who you are. And if you ever do want to start chasing your desires, you're going to need to address that first.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah. So when you talk about program, like, so we always talk about, mental software and where does that come from? How are these programs and patterns and are installed? Well, that they happen very early on in life. And typically it's comes from your family of origin, pretty much your mom and dad, right? Like, and you don't even have to have any memory of it, which is the trippy thing, because most people don't really have clear memories before they were 5 years old, that point at which you're pretty much wired in, right? Like, mm-hmm. Traditional psychology calls it your personality. It's your neural patterns that's pretty much baked in. And you don't really have any memories of this, but you can get clues from looking at mom and dad. And so this particular person dad was kind of this blue collared hard worker, you know, wasn't really chasing a dream, you know, as far as a career or anything. Just, you know, head down, do your job, get it done, pay the bills, support the family. And that is valuable, right? Like that, it'll get the job
Totally.
done. Be really good at getting the job done, right? Like just do what you have to do what you're told. And then if you even think about the societal or cultural kind of programming that occurs that, like in America at least, it's this puritanical, hardworking, blue collar, 9 to 5, punch in, punch out. No. Enjoy yourself. Do what you love. Now that's for like special people. That's for like movie stars and musicians and athletes. But
That's
they're
for
like
the 1%.
yeah, that's no, that's not us. That's not how we create success. How we create success is do a hardworking job, be responsible. That's it. So it's kind of a very common program in our culture, at least. And then, especially if your parents and their grandparents were really entrenched in that kind of, you know, strategy, that program for creating their success, well, it gets wired into you. And so now you're kind of left with like, that's all you know. That's all you've been taught. That's all you've been shown.
Totally.
You should take your trash out. You should go to work. You should, you know, all these shoulds. Don't necessarily like to do it, but I know I got to do it. And
yeah, it's
so,
what
yeah,
you've
it
been
doesn't
taught.
really leave
Yeah.
much space, to your point. Like, doesn't mean leave much space for the dreaming, the what if I could bring more, you know, passion, joy into my life, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, having it modeled from your parents, this is where people get into debates of like, oh, generational trauma and how's it passed down? Is it passed down biologically? Oh, well, that means I'm wired this way and that means I can't break out of it. Or, you know, it's like we can go down the rabbit hole. And now that we've identified it, right, and we can see, oh, this is the program, you know, what are some ways, you know, I know you have a lot of really good tools in the toolbox to create, you know, new pathways. What are some of the stuff you like to use now that we've recognized this is the program?
Yeah. And one more point on that, what's even more insidious is that software, that mindset of you just got to do what you do what you have to do, take care of the shoulds. Even more so, it penalizes you, or it's like you're not rewarded for doing the things that you love because now you're irresponsible. Now you're not getting your shit done. Now it's so there's even more pain associated with pursuing the pleasure, right? Like that's irresponsible to do that almost.
No, totally. Working out, you know, coming from the health and fitness industry, like that was the biggest thing. Oh, that's a luxury. That's that's a nicety. Oh, it's self-care. But like when people talk about self-care in that way, it's like it is a luxurious, like, oh, it's not a necessary thing. You know, and that's it couldn't be further from the truth, but that's just kind of what we grew up as. That's not a thing that's important.
Yeah.
Screwing around.
Right. So, yeah, first step to your point, just simply recognizing it is a pattern interrupt. If you can recognize that story or that pattern occurring, oh, I should do this. Oh, hold on a second. I said should. Wait, okay, do I want to do this? Do I have to? Okay, yeah, I do. I have to do it. But if you can just stop that in its tracks before it takes you down this vicious cycle or just unconsciously fixating on the shoulds, right? That interrupts the pattern. And then really it's just from a strictly like NLP, neuro linguistic programming, changing the thought pattern, the more time you spend on the things that you really want to do and emotionalize that, you start to change the pattern. So interrupting it, now changing the focus. And one of the examples I used was like, we've talked about it before, the reticular activation system.
Hmm.
Like if your brain's just primed to find all the things that you should be doing to please the ego or whatever, like that's all it's going to seek out. That's all it's going to see in its environment. Oh, I forgot to call this person back. Oh, I forgot to do the dish. You're like, you're
Absolutely.
just, so if you just simply prime yourself to recognize, to spend more time thinking about whether it's journaling, um, visualization, walking, you know, we have a classic tool, the I have a dream speech, which really it's just creating a speech of like, what is a dream day? Let's just start with like a day. What does a dream day look like? What are you doing? What would you be doing with your time? What is 5 years from now? Can you see 5 years into the future of like, what are you doing? What kind of house do you have? Where do you live? Who are your friends? Who, like, everything. The more time you can spend visualizing, emotionalizing that, it's also a pattern interrupt, but you're creating that new thought pattern in the mind so that it's not just this predominant, fixating on the shoulds kind of story.
Yeah. And I know in this case you said it's like I don't even know what I want, right? Like
Yeah.
you're so mired in it, right? So like when you think of, your mind body complex as a GPS, right? Like you need to know two things with a GPS. You need to know where you are and you need to know where you want to go.
Uh,
And I find that if you have both of those things, typically, you know, you're someone in life who's creating successes. You're someone who's achieving stuff, right? You know where you are, you know where you want to go. But a lot of times people know where they want to go, but they don't really know where they are right now.
hmm.
That I find actually is kind of the majority of the people I work with. I know I want to be, let's say a millionaire and a big house and travel a lot, right? Like to throw out some things. They think they know where they are right now, but they don't because they don't know those underlying patterns. They don't have the awareness of like, no, you think you're stuck in this job, but that's just where you think you are. Where you really actually are stuck in this looping pattern. So you quit that job. What's going to happen? Oh, the pattern's going to run the same equation again, and you're going to get to the next scenario that you're stuck in this. And this is why everyone always thinks if I just get this one other thing, I'll be different, right? And it's not true, right? And this is
Yeah.
so this is the problem of not knowing where you are, but knowing where you want to go. In this guy's case, it sounds like both things are he doesn't really know where he is until you've revealed it to him. If you've had this conversation already, hey, this is the pattern. Dad's a blue collar worker. Guess what? This was imprinted on you. Now he's got an idea of where he is. That's a huge first step, right? Just like orienting yourself with your current reality. It's something I do in my program work of like deconstructing the false self. Orient yourself with your current reality. Where are you right now? You think you know, but you have no idea.
Yeah.
The second piece is what you just brought up with this I have a dream speech is creating where you actually want to go and getting clear on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have great advice with starting really simple. What would you like your day to look like?
Yeah.
Okay, that's too much for you. Who do you want to hang out with?
Yeah.
What type of people do you just want to be around? What type of food do you like eating? Do you like, a nice slow breakfast, or do you want to like drink a protein shake on the way to the office? Like
Yeah.
you start so simple versus like, no, tell me what your 10-year plan is. Where are you going to live? What's it going to look like? What are you going to be doing? Like that could be really overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, and that's an important distinction too, that it's not necessarily the specific things. Like I have this job, I have, these things, which I think the point you're making is what they imagine will bring that happiness, that state they're looking for,
Yes,
the fulfillment, the freedom, the happiness, all these things all of us are wanting more of. we put so much weight on, or we think it's contingent upon the having these things happen or doing these things, versus if we can just start there, what does freedom, fulfillment, happiness, love look like? Where do you have that today? Well, not so much in my relationships. Well, this was actually something we talked about, the top six tool, right? Like, you're the average of the top six. I've heard it as five too, top 5 or 6 people that you spend the most time with. And numerous studies have been done on like the number one factor of happiness and success in all arenas is relationships. So what's the quality of your relationships? Who are the kind of people you want to associate with? If you're the average, right? Like,
Right.
so that's just one example of how you can start to change how you go about creating it. Because like, anytime I hear I don't know what I want, I'll use like the standard, you know more than I don't know, or if you did know, right? Or like,
Right. If you did know, what would the answer be?
It's like
that's a good
that
one.
kind of, that sentence just comes from, again, this horse with the blinders on. Like, they're not even seeing it, because all they're fixated on is the shoulds and what is. I'm unhappy at my job, I'm unhappy in this relationship, my money's not, my health isn't. It's removing the blinders, seeing it, that the story or the programming for what it is. And then now, what do I like? What do I really want? And you can even time travel back. So like, when you were a kid, what did you really like to do?
Yeah.
I was really into science, or, whatever it is, right? Like, there's more than I don't know. You just have to start dedicating more time and emotion into those sorts of things versus what isn't.
Right. And, the I don't know always comes into play as uh, the defense mechanism, the blocker, right?
Yeah.
It's like your ego's like, no. Like, no, you're the responsible hard worker.
Yeah.
You don't have time for that stuff. So you don't know, right? Like, you don't know what you want because this is what you want. I'm showing you what you want. You want this in your life, and you've dedicated so much time to focusing on this stuff in your life. We're getting more and more of it in our life right now. So like, understanding it, another little thing I like to do, with, depending on the person I'm working with, but I like to personify that ego or that identity. I look at the ego as like the mechanism that creates the identity, and you have like multiple identities. You only have one ego, but the ego creates multiple identities. And so like, I'll give it a name, right? Like, and sometimes it's a silly name, like if it's someone like shooting all over themselves, like Mr. Shoodles, right? Like, it's Mr. Shoodles saying you need to pay your bills right now, like, or you got to do the dishes.
Right.
And just that, like, Mr. Shittles doesn't know what he wants, but, but do you know what you want?
Yeah.
It's like, it's part of the pattern interrupt. It's part of like making it funny, and the personification of it now, instead of like, who's talking when the thought comes up. You're like, no, that's not me. That's not my true self. That's Mr. Shittles.
Yeah.
Right. You start to have a giggle about it. Mr. Shittles doesn't know what the fuck he wants in the future, but I bet you do, and it's like, you're able to kind of put it aside, versus it just being a part of you.
Yeah.
And that's because really that's one of the hardest things for people when they first start diving into these programs. They think the programs are them. They think I am my programs. It's like, no. Like, you are separate from your programs. However, your programs are like who you show up as, and to get like deep into philosophy, some people could be like, well, that is you. It is you who you show up as. Like, yeah, but for the purposes of this, right? Like, you are not your programs.
Yeah.
right?
Who you are is that unlimited 4-year-old version of you that's Superman, Superwoman that can do anything and is just off doing whatever they want, wanting what they want, living life at a 10. And then we get over time programmed with these things. We just pick up shitty software. That's it.
Yeah. And
And we pick up great
just
software too.
I was gonna say just to like not completely hate on the ego and the stuff is like
Yeah.
that got you success in your life. It
Yes.
got you out of a lot of problems and a lot of jams you were in. And this is why, I'm not a fan of ego death, and that
Yeah.
concept of like kill your ego and, oh, fuck you. You're not a part of my life anymore. It's like, no, man, like the ego did this to help you, right? It
Yeah.
did it and it's helped you out a lot in life. And, it's the reason you have a roof over your head. And it's the reason you aren't, in a worse place than you are right now.
Trying to
So
keep you safe and protect you.
exactly. So honoring it for that and being like, hey, I appreciate this program was awesome to get me to my life right now. And I'm ready to put it on the shelf, or I'm ready to start working with it, to
Yeah.
where I can also have happiness and safety and not just safety and sadness.
100%. Now, there's one last piece I'm going to add to this, and it's something to pay attention to as you ponder the programs and is it Mr. Shittles and is this true me? This kind of goes into the rogue program realm where sometimes, more frequently than not, if you were to actually say, no, I do know what I want these things, I want this freedom, fulfillment, happiness, love, success, all, but in order to have those, there could be some potential pain that comes with it. There could be, now that I've declared this is what I want, well, shit, I might have to leave my job. I might have to leave this relationship. I might, if I want that health, I'm going to have to work hard for like my fitness. It's a rogue program in the sense that it's again, the ego, you can call it ego, but it's trying to protect from the potential more pain that could come with actually making the changes, taking the actions to have the things. Is that making sense?
Yeah, totally.
So it's easier to say, I don't know. I don't want to see it. Like, it doesn't even want to go there.
It doesn't. And this is, again, what I've kind of found is when you don't shun the ego, when you don't completely try to kill the identity, right? Like that's a way is like killing that identity. You're never going to kill your ego, but you can kill an identity that it's created. However, it usually fights back really fucking hard.
Yeah.
And these rogue programs come up and it sabotages you every step of the way because it doesn't want to go away. Versus, and sometimes you do it in an actual conversation where you're talking to a part of yourself. But like when you can, journaling works really well for this too, writing a letter to it, a lot of times I'll picture it as my wounded 4-year-old self, not the excited 4-year-old self, but like when the wounding took place.
Yeah.
And I'm writing a letter to Dan, 4-year-old Dan. And I'm like,
Danny.
hey, little Danny, like, hey man, that was so awesome that you did this for me. And I know that was a really tough time you went through and what you created, gave us so much success today. And what I've realized from my point of view now, almost 40-year-old Dan here, that it's helped and we're not quite where we want to be with happiness. There's this piece that's missing that I feel like you would be so happy if we did this together.
Uh-huh.
And that, we took what you created and don't dismiss it. Don't completely throw it out, but like even use it. Because guess what? Someone who's hardworking and responsible, if you want to achieve goals in life, like that's a great tool to use. But you need to be in the driver's seat. not your identity in the driver's seat.
Hmm.
That's the big difference. Because otherwise it's going to do what you're saying with this rogue program. And it'll still come up. It's a backseat driver sometimes.
Mhm.
But the less you try to fight against it outright and more integrate it, right? Like, how can I weave this in? How can we work together to create this future? Then you're going to start seeing that sabotage. Like, the voice will be quieter. It won't be quite as, it'll be more of a concerning mother, like, ooh, hey, are you sure you want to go that route? It might invite some criticism. It's like, hey, you're right. It might. And I don't see any other way around it if we really want to go with our goals. So here's how we mitigate that. It's like
Yeah.
you can have this conversation every step of the way instead of just like trying to crush it into the ground and then have it pop up as this rogue program, like you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah. Love that. Again, identifying the who's talking. Is it shittles? Is it my highest self? Is it my true desires versus my shoulds? I think pretty much where all of our conversations comes back to consciousness. Who's running the
Absolutely.
show? Who's
100%.
talking?